Hello and welcome to another episode of the Road Hub International podcast, and that's hosted by me, Gideon Ewers. I am the editor of Road Hub International. Joining me today, I have the Princess of Prediction. There are very few people who have a crystal ball as accurate as Sara Dhariwal, who is the lead appraiser for helicopters and advanced air mobility at Cirium Consultancy. Sara, thanks for sparing me the time this morning to meet and talk some predictions.
Well, thank you very much for having me and for that fantastic introduction. Prediction in this space is not becoming easier.
That's for sure. I mean, this is the interesting thing. I mean, yet even so, you've tried to do that. You produced, I guess it was about a month ago, your 10-year forecast, and it had some interesting things that jumped out at me. I mean, one of the ones was talking about a requirement for, I think it was 7,500 more aircraft over that 10-year period. And that's a mixture, I guess, of replacement and a little bit of fleet expansion.
That's right. So it is 7,500 in the next 10 years we're predicting, which might sound a lot, but it's around about 700 new deliveries a year. Which we have more or less achieved in the past 10 years. Obviously, we did have the downturn years, which took it down to about 600. For the last two, it's been up there at around 710.
But it's one of those interesting things, isn't it? Because I mean, one of the other things that jumped out at me was the change in the attrition rate uh, for aircraft leaving the fleet either through accident or retirement, and that shifted a bit compared with looking at the modelling for or results for say 20 years ago. There's been a significant shift there too.
That's right. We're retiring less, and we have many of discussions over here about that. Whether if we hadn't had the downturn, would the rate of adoption of new technology have sped up, which then would have seen earlier retirements, which in appraisal terms perhaps wouldn't have been favorable because one of the things that makes this asset so investable is its long useful economic life prediction. And if we retire quicker, then that will reduce. Now, that obviously hasn't happened, but I think the most positive story from that is that our total loss rate has reduced from 1% in the sort of former 5-year period to the latest 5-year period's been about 0.5%, with last year being the lowest that we have ever recorded at 0.4%, which is a huge step forward for promoting safety in this industry.
And yeah, because that's the interesting thing. I picked up on that with the safety aspect, and it brings out the suggestion that because I mean it's sometimes I think it's a little bit unfair when people make comparisons on safety between the rotary industry and the fixed wing world and fail to take into account the very different types of operation. I mean, if when I think, I don't know whether you agree, when I think about the rotary market, I only think of offshore energy support as being anywhere near analogous to an airline type operation. Everything else is far more dynamic and so on. And that's never really taken into account. So the idea that attrition rate, as you just mentioned, in the last 5-year period is, lowest ever seen, and even before that, half what it had been previously. I think is a remarkable testament to. Do we think that's, I don't know, technologies like, I don't know, hum systems or elements like that improving outcomes?
I think that probably has a lot to do with it. I'll have to do a lot more digging into the cause of accident to know. It's obviously also tied to utilization, which the true figures of utilization we don't have. When we saw this reducing, which was over the COVID period, I guess our initial thought was because we're flying less, so we're crashing less. But because last year I don't think that was true. and we still have the lowest total loss rate than we've ever had. Now, you get total losses for a variety of reasons. It doesn't necessarily have to be a crash in flight, if you like. There's a lot of ground events that causes total losses as well. So I think a lot more analysis needs to be done to it. But I think you asked me at some point as well what the split between singles and
Mm.
twins. And the fleet is split about 60-40, 60% singles, 40% twins. And the accidents are 80-20. So we're seeing a lot more accidents with the single engine aircraft. And again, the reasons for that, I think, needs to be really looked at before we make any conclusions. But that's the truth of it.
Yeah, I mean, I guess with that, that split, and as you say, uh, maybe a reputable industry publication should do a story about that and try and look in, try and look into, that ratio because it does make for an interesting question. What does drive that difference in accident rates versus is it just the type of operation? Is it, uh, you know? down towards experience levels where, most owner-flown aircraft tend to be singles, and whether it's those sort of things too. And it does bear some examination for sure, I think. But yeah, I mean, moving away though from the safety dynamic, I was just thinking, I was also struck about the changes, because the offshore energy support market and how that's developing and evolving. Having gone through this period of doom and despondency from the middle of the last decade to well, not quite back to swinging grooviness, but things are very, very positive now compared. Uh, but that's thrown up the questions of heavies and super mediums.
It is looking a lot healthier, and I did say this a couple of years ago. I started this role in 2016, April, which I think was about a month before CHC filed for bankruptcy. And may I say, the fatal accident of the H225. So I lived through the next decade of my career impairing values. And the last couple of years I've been sort of almost struggling to keep up of this sort of improvement to values as we see the market firming. So I think that's really positive. I think the heavy dynamic is it's a really interesting one. What we're hearing on the market is that we don't have it's a shortfall of super mediums. We would need that extra capacity, yet we're not really seeing the delivery numbers to support that, and there could be a variety of reasons for that. And the other side of it, we've got the S92. There's no secret that the fleet is getting older, and I suppose a couple of years ago, our prediction was that the S92 fleet would reduce organically through aging. Now we haven't seen retirements in the 92s increasing at all. We have a couple of them a year on average, but it hasn't been a big increase. We haven't seen any machines really going into secondary usage role. So that's significant. Yet the fleet is being used. Even those that are over 20 years old are still being used on offshore contract, which means that the market likes them and potentially needs them.
Yeah, I guess there's two things coming into play there. There's one, there's certain jobs that only a heavy can do, and that's that. Uh, so you either have to have a heavy or you don't fly the route. And so I guess that might be a factor, but also I guess it's a little bit just needing to shift, people and stuff in sufficient quantity. And there's maybe it is that little thing where, you just mentioned where the super mediums aren't come for whatever reason, whether that's, supply chain stuff. Not that the S92 hasn't had its own supply chain problems, but supply chain stuff, or I think you've mentioned before, the ease of financing aircraft for offshore energy. Uh, for whatever reason, the super mediums aren't coming in the volumes that perhaps were talked about maybe 2 years ago or whatever, where I think even Airbus had talked about increasing production of 175s to 40 units a year. Well, that's nowhere near that, right?
It is not. So last year they delivered, and I remember that 40 a year as well. Um, Last year we had 13. This year so far we have had three 175s, 189s. Last year we had eight, and this year we've had four. Now, we do know that Q4 is the busiest period for an OEM, so I don't think we should close the order books just yet. There's still time to make that up, but I think it's going to be hard pressed to be anywhere around 40. I think for the S92 as well, though, it's a relatively cheap asset to come by these days compared to what it can actually do. Um, so compared to buying a S92 offshore configured under full PBH at say 12 million, buying the equivalent of a super medium will cost you around double that.
Yeah,
So I think is that sort of short versus long-term investment that I don't really think that our market has overcome just yet. With the sustainability angle as well, it is getting harder to fund aircraft that are intrinsically offshore aircraft. Because we have a gas guzzling helicopter serving an oil and gas market. I mean, it's not going to earn you many
it's
green
not gonna earn
credentials,
the
is it?
green points at all. Yeah. It is that interesting dichotomy there because it is on the one hand it does seem to be uh, a first and second world problem. Developing nations seem to have less of an issue. I mean, if we look at uh, parking the Gulf of Mexico and drill baby drill and all that for the moment. When you look at countries like Brazil, and what's happening in the Brazilian market for offshore production is growing dramatically. And yes, uh, it seems where again 18 months, 2 years ago, everybody was talking about energy security. That's in Europe as well. That seems to have fallen by the wayside a little bit. Um,
Well, I think it is what spurred the surge in demand and production um, increasing generally, and therefore spurring demand for helicopter transport
mhm,
everywhere. Um, but I guess it's a matter of how much do you produce, how much can you produce,
mhm.
and yes, Brazil is certainly a good seems to be a high demand market for it at the minute. Um, See how
Yeah,
that continues.
yeah. Let's talk a little bit now about the future stuff. And we've already just touched on it, talking about green credentials and financing and so on. And the other part of your remit, looking at the AAM market. Now, it's kind of it's an interesting market, really, isn't it? For a variety of reasons. One of the tricky things, certainly as somebody covering the industry, is trying to actually make sense of what really the market looks like in real terms. Now, you've done quite a lot of work on that in tracking the orders and the realities, whatever MOUs, LOIs, whatever we want to call them, tracking the announcements and possible duplications and stuff like that, and trying to come up with some kind of reality examples.
Yes, so it was a few years ago. I think it was 2021. I started because working with helis, the eVTOL conversations obviously trickling in more and more, and I saw on different media platforms there was an incredible amount of announcements, and I thought, well, some of these must be duplicated. So we drove our business to start recording the announcements. We call them generally order commitments because it's often quite unclear what state of firmness they're in. So we call them loosely orders. So we started tracking that in about 21 to try to get some sort of stability of what was going on. And yes, fact of the matter is that over time, the amount of orders that we've recorded has reduced quite significantly. So in 2022, I think we had a year quarter-on-quarter growth of about 14%. In that year. In 23, that reduced to 7, and so far in 25, bearing in mind this quarter to go, we've got a 2%. So it does seem that there's some cooling off, or maybe saturation of orders. There's only so many orders any one company can put in on eVTOLs, I suppose.
Yeah, and I guess it also comes back down to questions about the progress is not as rapid as not necessarily talk when they're talking to established operators of aircraft, but more maybe new entrant thinking operating aircraft. And so you have this thing of saying, yes, yes, we'll have service entry by this date, and it doesn't happen. And now it's going to be that date. And so the magic number seems to be at the moment everyone talks about 2030, but it's a how long is a piece of certification, is a how long is a piece of string question. When we were talking about the offshore thing, we didn't mention just now the 525 and what impact that may or may not have in that market when it is eventually certified. And yet that's a much simpler certification, you would think, than the idea of any of the proposed eVTOLs.
Yeah, I started comparing that fair time ago and said, we got a few examples in the heli world. We got the 525, we got the AW609. Is that coming 20 years in
Oh yeah,
development
at
at the
least,
minute?
yeah,
Something
yeah.
like that. And that's a tilt rotor with multiple rotors on it, which makes it quite complex, and a lot of these eVTOLs have the same mechanism. You've got the 160, it took a little while to hit market. We've got the AW09, which has been in development for quite some time, and that's a smaller aircraft. So yeah, I think the estimation of time it will take to certify these, bearing in mind there's not really any firm certification guidelines in FAA or the CA, from what or EASA, from what I can gather. They're working on it. It's a work in progress. So I think it's hugely underestimated the complexity of these type of aircraft,
Mhm.
and that's just talking about certification.
Yeah, and then the realities of operation, I guess, is the other thing. Fundamentally, all of these people that you analyze and we cover on RotorHub are all in a simple business, and that is moving people and things by air at a price that makes a profit. And I guess, when it comes down to it, if whatever aircraft doesn't have a cost line that significant is at least as good or preferably better than the product it may replace. It doesn't matter how sustainable or arguably sustainable it is, the operators aren't going to go for it.
Yeah, I think that's an issue, and the ones that we the ones running at the forefront, the payload range is not anywhere near existing to what existing technology can do. And I think that seat mile cost is going to be an issue, whatever goods you manage to transfer with these things, because it's not just people we're talking about, but transport, middle mile logistics and things like that as well. But ultimately the concept has to make a financial sense, and I think that's where it's struggling a little bit. I think the aircraft themselves have to, or the sort of manufacturing process have to get up to an economy of scale point. It's got to be a critical mass of these aircraft produced. When you look then at and compare it to the helicopter industry, all helicopter OEMs, Bell, Leonardo, Airbus, they have even Sikorsky, they have a few products, right, that they produce and churn out to the market. So that means they have a number of product ranges that can ultimately make them revenue and speed up that process of the manufacturing process. If you only have one aircraft that you're producing, I'm wondering if you're going to perhaps struggle a little bit to get up to that mass production. Looking at Robinson, they have a really slick operation in terms of manufacturing, and that's kind of what these eVTOLs need to get up to. But not even Robinson is producing the number of aircraft that
Mhm.
the eVTOL OEMs are saying that they're going to get up to reach that critical mass, which I think is around 2,000 a year,
It's,
which
yeah,
seems like an incredible amount of aircraft, and I'm not entirely sure where they're all going to go.
yeah, for sure. So we where new entrant OEMs may be beaten by volume of production, we've in fact been beaten by time. So it's always a delight to spend time talking with you and getting your jewels of wisdom. And it's been a joy. So thank you very much for spending the time with us.
Thank you for having me. It's been a pleasure as always. And I shall see you at European Rotors, perhaps.
Of course, yeah. Well, as Sarah mentioned, European Rotors is not very far away, and of course, you can keep up to date with all the show news, announcements, and gossip through the pages of the European Rotor Show dailies, and they're brought to you by the Rotor Hub International team. So, join us again in another 2 weeks for another edition, another chat where we'll be talking all things vertical lift.